The Cape Peninsula is a generally rocky peninsula that juts out into the Atlantic Ocean at the southwestern extremity of the African continent. At the southern end of the peninsula are Cape Point and the Cape of Good Hope. On the northern end is Table Mountain overlooking Cape Town, South Africa. The peninsula is 52 kilometers long from Mouille Point in the north to Cape Point in the south. The peninsula has been an island on and off for the past 5 million years, as sea levels fell and rose with the Ice Age and interglacial global warming cycles of particularly the Pleistocene. The last time that the peninsula was an island was about 6,000 years ago. Soon afterwards it was joined to the mainland by the emergence from the sea of the sandy area now known as the Cape Flats. The towns and villages of the Cape Peninsula and Cape Flats now form part of the City of Cape Town Metropolitan Municipality. The Cape of Good Hope is sometimes given as the meeting point of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Thus, the west coast of the peninsula is invariably referred to as the Atlantic coast, but the eastern side is known as the False Bay coast. It is at Cape Point that the ocean to the south is often said to be divided into the Atlantic Ocean to the west and the Indian Ocean to the east. However, according to the International Hydrographic Organization agreement that defines the ocean boundaries, the meeting point is at Cape Agulhas, about 200 kilometers to the southeast. Similarly, Cape Point is not the fixed meeting point of the cold Benguela current running northwards along the west coast of Africa, and the warm Agulhas current running south from the equator along the east coast of Africa. In fact, the south-flowing Agulhas current swings away from the African coastline between about East London and Port Elizabeth, from where it follows the edge of the continental shelf roughly as far as the southern tip of the Agulhas Bank, 250 kilometers south of Cape Agulhas, for there it is retroflexed in an easterly direction by the South Atlantic, South Indian and Southern Ocean currents, known as the west wind drift, which flow eastwards round Antarctica. The Benguela current, on the other hand, is an upwelling current which brings cold, mineral-rich water from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean to the surface along the west coast of southern Africa. Having reached the surface, it flows northwards as a result of the prevailing wind and Coriolis forces. The Benguela current, therefore, effectively starts at Cape Point and flows northwards from there, although further out to sea it is joined by surface water that has crossed the South Atlantic from South America as part of the South Atlantic JA. Thus, the Benguela and Agulhas currents do not strictly meet anywhere, although eddies from the Agulhas current are from time to time round the Cape to join the Benguela current. Ecology. Table Mountain National Park, previously known as the Cape Peninsula National Park, was proclaimed on the 29th of May 1998, for the purpose of protecting the natural environment of the Table Mountain chain, and in particular the rare fynbos vegetation. The park comprises a large part of the undeveloped area of the Cape Peninsula, and is managed by South African National Parks Board. The coastal waters surrounding the Cape Peninsula are proclaimed as a marine protected area since 2004, and include several no-take zones, and are part of the national park. The waters of this marine protected area are unusual in that they are parts of two fairly distinct marine bioregions, namely the Agulhas bioregion and the southwestern Cape bioregion. The boundary is at Cape Point. Flora. The Cape Peninsula has an unusually rich biodiversity. Its vegetation consists predominantly of several different types of the unique and rich Cape fynbos. The main vegetation type is endangered Peninsula sandstone fynbos, but critically endangered Peninsula granite fynbos. Peninsula shale Renister veldt and Afro-montane forest occur in smaller portions on the the mountain ranges of the peninsula. On the sandy Cape Flats lowlands there are few pockets of protected Cape Flats and fynbos. The peninsula's vegetation types form part of the Cape Floral Region protected areas. These protected areas are World Heritage Site, and an estimated 2,200 species of plants are confined to Table Mountain Range, which are at least as many as occur in the whole of the United Kingdom. Many of these species, including a great many types of proteas, are endemic to these mountains and can be found nowhere else. The Zaian flora, despite its restricted range within the Western Cape, is relatively common in the perennially wet areas on Table Mountain and the back table, but hardly anywhere else on the Cape Peninsula. It is a very showy orchid that blooms from January to March on the Table Mountain sandstone regions of the mountain. Although they are quite widespread on the back table, the best place to view these beautiful blooms is in the aqueduct off the Smuts Track, halfway between Skeleton Gorge and Maclear's Beacon. Remnant patches of indigenous forest persist in the wetter ravines. However, much of the indigenous forest was felled by the early European settlers for fuel for the lime kilns needed during the construction of the castle. The exact extent of the original forests is unknown, though most of it was probably along the eastern slopes of Devil's Peak, Table Mountain and the back table, where names such as Rondebosch, Kirstenbosch, Klazenbosch and Witterboomen survive. Hout Bay was another source of timber and fuel, as the name suggests. In the early 1900s, commercial pine plantations were planted on these slopes all the way from the Constantiaberg to the front of Devil's Peak, and even on top of the mountains. But these have now been largely cleared, allowing fynbos to flourish in the regions where the indigenous Afro-montane forests have not survived, or never existed. Fynbos is a fire-adapted vegetation, and evidence suggests that in the absence of regular fires, all but the drier fynbos would become dominated by trees. Regular fires have dominated fynbos for at least the past 12,000 years, largely as a result of human activity. In 1495, Vasco da Gama named the South African coastline Terra de Fume because of the smoke he saw from numerous fires. This was originally probably to maintain a productive stock of edible bulbs and to facilitate hunting, and later, after the arrival of pastoralists, to provide fresh grazing after the rains. Thus, the plants that make up fynbos today are those that have been subjected to a variety of fire regimes over a very long period of time, and the preservation now requires regular burning. The frequency of the fires obviously determines precisely which mix of plants will dominate any particular region, but intervals of 10 to 15 years between fires are considered to promote the proliferation of the larger protea species, a rare local colony of which, the Aurochs umbellata, was wiped out on the peninsula by more frequent fires, as have been the silky-haired pincushion, Leucospermum vestitum, the red sugarbush, Protea grandiceps, and Burchell's sugarbush, Protea burchelli. Although a stand of a dozen or so plants has recently been rediscovered in the saddle between Table Mountain and Devil's Peak, some bulbs may similarly have become extinct as a result of too rapid sequence of fires. The fires that occur on the mountains today are still largely due to unregulated human activity. Fire frequency is therefore a matter of chance rather than conservation. Despite intensive conservation efforts, the Table Mountain Range has the highest concentration of threatened species of any continental area of equivalent size in the world. The non-urban areas of the Cape Peninsula have suffered particularly under a massive onslaught of invasive of alien plants for well over a century, with perhaps the worst invader being the cluster pine, partly because it was planted in extensive commercial plantations along the eastern slopes of the mountains, north of Mouille. Considerable efforts have been made to control the rapid spread of these invasive alien trees. Other invasive plants include black wattle, blackwood, Port Jackson and rhubarons, as well as several harkia species and bramble. Fauna. The most common mammal on the mountains was the dassie, or rock hyrax. Between about 2000 and 2004 the numbers suddenly plummeted for unknown reasons. They used to cluster around the upper cable station on Table Mountain, near areas where tourists discarded as supplied food. The population crash of the dassies has in all probability been responsible for the decline in the Verreaux's eagle population on the peninsula. From 2004 till 2012 there was only one nesting pair on the cliffs below Noordhoek Peak, when previously there had been at least 3 pairs, one of which had a cliff nest near the upper cable station on Table Mountain in Blinkwater Ravine. Dassies were an important part of the Verreaux's eagles' prey on the peninsula. Table Mountain is also home to porcupines, mongooses, snakes, lizards, tortoises, and a rare endemic species of amphibian that is only found on Table Mountain, the Table Mountain ghost frog. The last lion in the area was shot circa 1802. Leopards persisted on the mountains until perhaps the 1920s but are now extinct locally. 2 smaller, secretive, nocturnal carnivores, the rooicat and the Vaal-boscat, were once common in the mountains and the mountain slopes. The rooicat continues to be seen on rare occasions by mountaineers, but the status of the Vaal-boscat is uncertain. The mountain cliffs are home to several raptor species, apart from the Verreaux's eagle. They include the jackal buzzard, booted eagle, African harrier hawk, peregrine falcon and the rock kestrel. There are currently 4 pairs of African fish eagles on the peninsula, but they nest in trees generally as far away from human habitation as is possible on the peninsula. Up until the late 1990s baboons occurred on all the mountains of the peninsula, including the back table immediately behind Table Mountain. Since then they have abandoned Table Mountain and the back table, and only occur on the Constantiaberg and the mountains to the south. They have also abandoned the tops of many of the mountains, in favor of the lower slopes, particularly when these were covered in pine plantations which seem to provide them with more, or higher quality food than the fine boughs on the mountain tops. However, these new haunts are also within easy reach of Cape Town's suburbs, which brings them into conflict with humans and dogs, and the risk of traffic accidents. There are now a dozen troops on the peninsula, varying in size from 7 to over 100 individuals, scattered on the mountains from the Constantiaberg to Cape Point. The baboon troops are the subject of intense research into the movements, the physiology, genetics, social interactions and habits. In addition, the sleeping sites are noted each evening, so that monitors armed with paintball guns can stay with the troop all day, to ward them off from wandering into the suburbs. From when this initiative was started in 2009, the number of baboons on the peninsula has increased from 350 to 450, and the number of baboons killed or injured by residents has decreased. Himalayan Tatars, fugitive descendants of Tatars that escaped from Gruut-Shu'uzu near the University of Cape Town in 1936, used to be common on the less accessible upper parts of the mountain. As an exotic species, they were almost eradicated through a culling program initiated by the South African national parks to make way for the reintroduction of indigenous klipspringers. Until recently there were also small numbers of fallow deer of European origin and sambar deer from Southeast Asia. These were mainly in the Rhodes Memorial area, but during the 1960s they could be found as far afield as Signal Hill. These animals may still be seen occasionally despite efforts to eliminate or relocate them. On the lower slopes of Devil's Peak, above Gruchu Hospital, an animal camp bequeathed to the city of Cape Town by Cecil John Rhodes has been used in recent years as part of the quagga project. The quagga are used to roam the Cape Peninsula, the Karoo and the Free State in large numbers, but were hunted to extinction during the early 1800s. The last quagga died in an Amsterdam zoo in 1883. In 1987 a project was launched by Reinhold Rau to backbreed the quagga, after it had been established, using mitochondrial DNA obtained from museum specimens, that the quagga was closely related to the plains zebra, and on the 20th of January 2005 a foal considered to be the first quagga-like individual because of a visible reduced striping, was born. These quagga, like zebra, are officially known as Rau quagga, as no one can be certain that they are anything more than quagga lookalikes. The animal camp above Gruchu Hospital has several good-looking Rau quaggas, but they are unfortunately not easily seen except from within the game camp, which is quite large and undulating, and the animals are few. The animal camp is not open to the public. Geology. The Cape Peninsula is underlain by the oldest rocks in the area, the Malmesbury Group, and the granite intrusions of the Peninsula Pluton. The Malmesbury Group has been dated from between 830 and 980 MA, and was deformed during the Saldanian orogenic cycle, both before and during the granite intrusions of 630 to 500 MA, and there are minor intrusions which precede the granite. The base of this group has not been exposed. The basal rocks were eroded to a relatively featureless peneplain with exposed granites covering most of the peninsula south of Lion's Head and Devil's Peak. The Sea Point Contact Zone, described by Charles Darwin, is a well-known region of metamorphic rocks formed by the granite intrusion into the Malmesbury rocks. These rocks were later unconformably covered by the Cape Supergroup. The Cape Supergroup is divided into 8 formations, the 3 oldest of which are present on the peninsula. The lowest present is the reddish Graaf Water Formation, which consists of shales and sandstone. The Graaf Water Formation can be clearly seen in the cutting on the second hairpin bend as the Aukaapse Weg goes up the slope from Westlake on to the Silvermine Plateau. In the cutting one can also see the abrupt and obvious transition into the Table Mountain sandstone above it. Looking up the slope from below to the first hairpin bend, the granite basement on which the Graaf Water Formation rests is visible, and in the cutting at the first hairpin bend, the ochre-colored, gritty clay into which the granite weathers is clearly displayed. The relatively thin Graaf Water layer is overlain by the prominent Peninsula Formation, which consists mainly of hard, erosion-resistant, quartzitic sandstone, which form the high, prominent, almost vertical cliffs of the Cape Peninsula. At the very top of Table Mountain, at Maclear's Beacon, is a small remnant of the Pacoe diamictites, better represented in the Cederberg Mountains, 200 kilometers to the north of Cape Town. Footnote: